Welcome here, everyone, to our webinar with Father James Martin. And tonight, he's going to be speaking on building bridges, reaching out to those on the margins. This is sponsored by the Center for Christian Engagement and St. Joseph the Worker Parish in Richmond, BC. We're so glad you can join us tonight for our conversation and discussion with Father Jim. I'm Dr. John Martins, the director of the CCE at St. Mark's College, the Catholic College at the University of British Columbia. So the program tonight for the next hour or so is going to be quite straightforward. I'm going to introduce Jim shortly, ask him to offer a short introduction himself. Then I'm going to ask him some questions about how to build bridges, how to reach out to people on the margins, including LGBT people in the church or people who'd like to get connected to the church community. This is a difficult time in many ways, economically, as we all know, in a lot of places, and that can even have more of an impact for those on the margins of society. And please feel free, as we're speaking, as I'm asking Father Jim questions, to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will try to get to all of them. So I just want to say a few words about Father Martin. I'm sure many of you know his work. He's an American Jesuit priest, a writer, editor-at-large of the Jesuit magazine America. Pope Francis appointed him to the Vatican Secretariat for Communications in 2017, and he's written numerous books. The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything, A Spirituality for Real Life, Jesus, a Pilgrimage, a book I really love, My Life with Saints, The Saints. And by the way, that doesn't mean I don't love his other books. I just really like Jesus, a Pilgrimage. And Father Martin, of course, has had a lot of outreach to the LGBT community, and that's drawn a lot of support, and some people have not been supportive within the Catholic Church. And that's a subject of his book, Building a Bridge, how the Catholic Church and the LGBT community can enter into a relationship of respect, compassion, and sensitivity. And this will be an important part of our conversation today. So, Father Jim Martin, welcome to the webinar. Thank you so much for being with us live from New York City.
Thanks, John. It's good to be with you. And you can call me Jim since we know each other. I've relied on John's own scholarship, particularly in my Jesus, a Pilgrimage book, as he knows. And I just want to thank the CCE and St. Mark's College for inviting me. As John was saying, I work at America Media. Most people these days seem to know me more for the LGBTQ stuff, but really that's just part of my work. I have a new podcast coming out. This sounds like an ad, I know, but I just wanted to let you know what's going on. A new podcast called The Spiritual Life, which should be fun. And then my most recent book, Come Forth, The Promise of Jesus' Greatest Miracle, is actually on the raising of Lazarus, which the story some of us heard this past Sunday, if you were looking at the scrutinies in year A for the catechumens. And interestingly, in the Orthodox Church, what's called Lazarus Saturday, which is actually a kind of a feast that they celebrate in the Eastern churches, is coming up this Saturday. So if you have any questions about Lazarus, now's the time to answer them. Anyway, I'm happy to be with you and happy to enter into a conversation with John, and then also hear your questions afterwards. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you. So, I want to build on what you just mentioned, Jim, that you're first of all a pastor, and I mean, your books range, of course, from the heart of the Christian life, Jesus himself, and a range of topics: the saints, how to support people, the biblical material, of course, as you just mentioned, on Lazarus. So what drew you, first of all, to the life of a priest and a pastor? Was there a specific call that you heard?
Yeah, John, it was first to the life as a Jesuit. No, actually, that's not true. That's not true. I have to revise. It really was to the priesthood because I didn't really know much about religious life, so-called, as they, religious life in a religious order. I was working at General Electric, formerly great company. After graduating from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business, I studied finance. Our other joke was not finance. That's studying finance sounds much better. And worked for GE. And long story short, was kind of unsatisfied and dissatisfied. And I turned on the TV one night and saw a documentary about Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk, and that got me interested in reading his book, The Seven-Story Mountain. I didn't know anything about religious orders or anything. I mean, I knew sort of that there were religious orders called Jesuits and Trappists and Benedictines and Basilians, but I mean, I think I thought that they were, believe it or not, that it was a kind of academic degree. You went to this Jesuit school and you have an SJ after your name. In any event, Merton led me to think about being a priest in the sense of something that was other directed. And then I found the Jesuits, and that really just clicked, their spirituality and their way of life. And so I ended them in 1988, 6 years after I graduated from Wharton. I was 27, so it was almost, gosh, 40 years ago. As you know, time flies.
Uh,
So yeah, so it was a kind of circuitous route.
yeah. Well, as someone born in 1960 as well, I do know that time flies. It's surprising, right, that you can say now almost 40 years ago.
Yes.
Um, but the Jesuits describe themselves, do they not, as men for others? They describe Jesus as the man for others, and that does seem to be one of these attractions, so that drew you in from reading Merton and to the Jesuits.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think what drew me in initially, I'm looking at an icon of Merton I have on my wall. What drew me in initially was kind of the beauty of monastic life. Just, this documentary I saw, which is still online, by the way, it's called Merton: a Film Biography. It's about a half an hour, by Paul Wilkes. And it seems so romantic and beautiful and ethereal almost. I just thought, I imagine myself, wearing a habit, kind of gliding through the halls and being very prayerful, which they do. I mean, I'm not making fun of them. That is a lot of the monastic life. Maybe not gliding, but praying and keeping silent. And it was the Jesuits that kind of hooked me. And I think that what I appreciated most about the Jesuits, you're right, that man for others or person for others, that was a line from Pedro Rupe, our former superior general. Now it's men and women for others, in a lot of our schools, was really that they did so many different things. So I remember thinking you could be a pastor and a Jesuit, you could be as you know, a professor and a Jesuit, you could be a social worker and who's a Jesuit. I have a guy that I live with who's a prison chaplain. That really appealed to me, that kind of sort of hyphenated priest, which I know is sometimes pejorative, but it, meant a lot to me, and it made a lot of sense to me. And they also were able to use lots of different talents. So, if let's say you entered as a PhD in New Testament, they use you. They wouldn't just say, get rid of that. So I really found that practical. And so it was what they did that attracted me, but I think it is who they are, that keeps me, or that kept me. It's just, their spirituality, less so than what we do.
Yeah. And
Also, and we had no idea that there was going to be a Jesuit Pope. So there's
no,
that too.
no, I can say that when Francis became the first Jesuit Pope, I was writing at America at that time, and I know there was genuine amazement and joy.
That's a good word, amazement, right?
But Francis does encompass so much of what it means to be a Jesuit, to be someone for others, to care for people on the margins. And that's something that I think has been made manifest throughout all of your writing, and I know in you as a person. So is this something that you brought with you as you came into the Jesuit order, as you became a priest? Was it something that you grew into as you were formed as a Jesuit?
I'm smiling because definitely not something I brought into the Jesuits. Let me tell you, Wharton, I got a very good business education. GE, I got a lot of good experience, but it was not about helping people in the margins. It was about helping the margins, right? It was helping the company's margins. I'm just realizing that kind of pun. Our profit margins. It wasn't about people on the margins. But as soon as I entered the Jesuits, like all religious orders, we are asked to work with people who are poor. The very first thing I did was work in a hospital in Cambridge, Mass. For people with serious illnesses. Then I worked with Mother Teresa's sisters in Kingston, Jamaica, with people off the street. I worked in a homeless shelter. I worked in a school for poor boys. And then, throughout my whole training, I worked for 2 years, as you know, I worked in East Africa, Kenya with refugees. So it was kind of part of it makes sense. This is what we do. We work with those who are excluded. And we're not alone in that in religious orders, but it's a particular emphasis in the Jesuits, living simply, working with the poor. And so when it came to, one of the topics for tonight, working with LGBT people was the most natural thing in the world because, these are people who are marginalized in their own church. So yeah, it was, but that's an easy question, John. Definitely not something I brought with me.
Well, I don't know. It had to be incipient there. It had to be resting there.
I guess so. I've always, it wasn't like I was mean.
No,
And I know that's not what you're implying. And there was a spark there, but I had zero experience with that. Zero.
that's really interesting though, because it does show how God can use people though too. How when you're open to God's call, in a variety of ways, in wherever you are situated, God can speak and use those talents and gifts that you do have.
Yeah. And, when I was in Kenya, we ended up starting a shop that marketed refugee handicrafts. And I used my business background, marketing and accounting. And yeah, so as they say, God writes it straight with crooked lines.
That's right. So you did mention LGBT people and wanting to find a place for them in the church and a home for them in the church. When did you first see this as sort of a specific call that people, gay, lesbian people, others were not being able to feel welcome at church or not being welcomed at church?
Well, quite recently, I certainly, had LGBTQ friends. Now, back in the day, we would just call them, gays and lesbians.
Right.
And I knew, many of the parishioners that would come, or some of the parishioners that would come to Jesuit churches where I would, go to worship were LGBT. I had LGBT friends and, spiritual directees, just, as you would have friends from any other kind of group.
Yeah.
And I would occasionally, as you know it, I would occasionally write about them in America because I felt that there weren't too many people writing about them or advocating for them. But it wasn't until 2016 when the Pulse nightclub massacre happened in Orlando. 49 people were killed. And I remember thinking that the response of the U.S. bishops was pretty paltry. And, it was the largest mass shooting in U.S. history at that time. Sadly, that's been exceeded. And only a handful of bishops said anything. I think there was like a 1 or 2 line communique from the U.S. Bishops Conference. And I just remember thinking, vividly, I remember thinking, what do these people have to do to get some sort of compassion? Isn't it enough they get murdered, or killed? So I did a Facebook post about that, expressing my frustration, and that went viral. And then that led to a talk was sponsored by New Ways Ministry, which is a group that advocates for LGBT Catholics. And that led to this book, Building a Bridge, which I know people find it surprising to hear, was not supposed to be a big deal book. It was just supposed to be sort of a one-off, as they say.
Right.
Just the talk and then some meditations. But it turned into this big deal and led to a lot of talks and a lot of protests and led me to be invited to talk at a Vatican event in Dublin and then meet the Pope. And so I did not anticipate it at all, but, apparently God did. And at each step I asked for permission for my superiors, as a good Jesuit, or try to be a good Jesuit.
Yeah.
And then we've started this ministry called Outreach. So it just happened. I did not plan it. And it was, I'm not a controversialist. And so it's
Right.
probably like the last kind of ministry I would want to do.
Yeah. And I just want to go back to what you mentioned about outreach, because you do have a website too, so you should let people know about that. We can mention it again later, but that's
outreach.faith.
Faith.
Outreach.faith. And it's a wonderful resource. We have news and essays and videos, and particularly helpful as a resource library. where you can look up articles about LGBTQ outreach in parishes and schools and within families, and questions about transgender issues. And it's really great. I'm particularly proud of the resource library. And then also we have a conference every other year. We have a retreat every other year. So it's grown into a nice ministry for
Yeah.
LGBTQ Catholics and their families and friends.
Now, you mentioned that this ministry just sort of grew organically, but that there were also some protests. Have things gotten better in terms of the church's welcome to LGBT people?
Well, they haven't gotten better in terms of protests because I'm going to talk to next week at Secretariat University, and there are already calls for protests. The irony is I'm giving a talk on Lazarus.
Ah,
It's like the protest Lazarus. Go ahead. He's already
Lazarus.
alive. Um, I think marginally they have. I think it depends where you are. So certainly in the West and North America, it has gotten better. And what do I mean by that? That doesn't mean that every single parish is a place where LGBT Catholics feel welcome, which they should. It's their church too, right? Um, and but I think when you look at the number of parish LGBT groups, national Catholic LGBT groups, but particularly one of the things that strikes me is, and again, this is not everywhere, retreats. So I'll tell you a funny story, which is a kind of anecdote. We are having a retreat in June coming up outside of Philadelphia, and we were advertising it for our outreach community, open to everybody. And that week that we announced it, it's kind of funny. Someone wrote to me and said, "Oh, will you advertise our LGBT Catholic retreat on your website in Mariondale Retreat Center in New York?" I was like, "Oh." And then someone else wrote and said, "Would you advertise our LGBT retreat?" Now, part of me selfishly was like, "Well, we have our retreat. We want to."
Yeah.
But then I thought, wasn't this great? And that's a real sign. And look, Pope Francis has been in for what, 12 years? That would not have happened 12 years ago. And a lot of it is thanks to him and his openness and his willingness to really engage this community and I want to say to people who might be doubtful, saying, "Whoa, why should we support them?"
Yeah.
No one's life is in full conformity with church teaching. I mean, unless Jesus or Mary is out there listening, that's not the case. And also, I often use the example of, and we can change it to British Columbia, a 15-year-old boy who's gay in British Columbia who thinks that God hates him.
Yeah.
And that's who outreach is really for. So that kid can go online and find articles that are affirming, right? I mean, that kid has done nothing.
Yeah.
He's not married. He's not doing anything, in any sort of sexual relationship. He's not. So that's the kind of kid or the kind of person that we're looking at who really needs ministering to,
Yeah.
because many parishes and even some bishops just won't say anything positive about that kid, you
Yeah.
know? So,
Yeah, that's really an important point, I think. I mean, the general point that you make about the fact that all of our lives require our own challenges. We have to constantly be asking ourselves, is this living in accord with the gospel? Could I do better here? But even apart from that, that we're all loved. And
yeah.
that kind of message, it seems to me, especially for teenagers who are struggling, but for all people who are struggling, there has to be a voice that says you're welcome and you're loved.
And there aren't many in the church, I'll have to say. I mean, there are certain cardinals and archbishops and bishops who are very open, and pastors and lay leaders like yourself, but there's not a lot. And people are so afraid. Let me give you an example
Yeah.
of the fear. About 5 years ago, maybe, I was contacted by a group called the Tyler Clementi Foundation. Now, that name may not be as well known in Canada, but Tyler Clementi was a young man who was bullied because he was gay at Rutgers University and took his life by jumping off the George Washington Bridge in New York, okay, and killed himself. So his mother, Jane, who's lovely, started this foundation against bullying, basically. I mean, it is the most basic thing you could imagine. So she contacted me and we were talking, she wanted to try to figure out ways to reach out to the Catholic Church. So we came up with this idea of coming up with a letter that bishops could sign. The most banal letter you could imagine. We, as Catholic bishops, are against, I think I can remember it, harassment, bullying, and violence against LGBTQ people, especially young people. That was basically it. You can look it up online.
Mhm.
There are something like 250, 300 bishops in the US. We got 14 that would agree to sign. I mean, 14, only 14 would even say that they were against violence.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary to me. I mean, that is not a controversial statement, but no, a lot of them said it sounds like advocacy. And I thought, well, nothing wrong with advocating for people who are being bullied.
No.
So there's so much fear and judgment and uh just misunderstanding. And I think a lot of it is that they just don't know these people.
Yeah.
So that's another reason for sort of trying to push ahead.
Yeah. And one of the things that's interesting about not knowing people is that so many of us do have family members and friends who are part of the LGBT community, whom we know
Yeah.
and love for who they are,
Yeah.
and know them as complete and full people.
Right.
And I think that is such an important aspect to this sort of outreach, is just recognizing the humanity of each person.
I totally agree. And I want to say two things. That's a very astute point. I want to say two things. One, the proportion of the church that is LGBTQ is small, right? So it's a small percentage of the pop, whatever it is. You see these figures,
Right.
5%, maybe. Let's just say 5%. That's pretty small. The percentage of Catholics who have LGBTQ people in their family, among their friends, among their coworkers, as neighbors, that's big. That's a
Yeah.
big percentage, and that's growing. But the second thing I want to say is that I often use the example, people say, well, what are these people doing? And I use the example of married couples using birth control. Now, something like in the United States, 80% of married couples think that is not a problem. Okay. And you can say that however many percentage are using it, maybe 50%, just to come up with a number. You don't hear pastors and bishops thundering at the pulpit about how disgraceful this is, and this is, and it's against the church teaching.
Mhm.
Why is that? Because we respect and reverence these people's consciences, and we say, look, they know church teaching and they're doing their best, and we respect them, and we listen to them, and we accompany them. I think that really means that goes along with knowing them,
Mhm.
right? And knowing the sort of circumstances of their lives. I think that we are not there yet with LGBTQ people, but we're getting there.
Mhm.
So it's a long road. So it's can you treat the LGBTQ person the same way you would treat someone who's using birth control?
Yeah. That word accompany is really important, I think. What is the best way for people in parishes here in Vancouver or in Richmond? St. Joseph the Worker Parish has helped us bring you to this webinar, and other parishes in this archdiocese. What's the best way for us to sort of accompany people?
Those are great questions. I think the most basic thing for a pastor or for pastoral staff would be to mention them.
Mhm.
I think some of the easiest things to do. I sometimes when I'm preaching, no, I don't think it's appropriate every single gospel. I mean, obviously, but I think when you say something like, Jesus reaches out to all people, young and old, rich and poor, different races, gay or straight, just something simple like that. That sends a little bit of a message.
Mhm.
Mention them in parish homilies. But I think, parish bulletins. But I think, I often point to three things. One, listening to what do they need?
Mhm.
Right? What do they need? And what's going on with them in their lives? Welcoming them. And that really is maybe having an LGBTQ outreach group, maybe having a lecture on the topic, nothing controversial, just, on the topic, a prayer group. And then I think the harder thing is advocating for them.
Mhm.
So that when people are being really mistreated, like if there's some situation of violence or bullying, and we know it's a very complicated topic, but whatever you think about it, transgender people are really being bullied and really treated like dirt. Just
Mhm.
stand up for them, right? That's what it also means to accompany. But I think basically, John, and it's funny, I was thinking about this as the passion comes near, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. It's just
Yeah.
being their friend. I mean, really being their friend. Because a lot of times LGBTQ Catholics feel like in their own churches that they're not welcome. I'll tell you a story if you don't mind.
No,
I told
please.
Pope Francis this story. I, and I think people that are on this webinar are obviously open-minded, but people tend to forget what LGBTQ people have to put up with. A couple of years ago, I was at Villanova University outside of Philly, my hometown. Go Eagles. And a woman came up to me, middle age, maybe about my age, and she's told me this story that sounds like I'm making it up, but I'm not, about her son who had felt estranged from the church for a long time as a teenager. And he had decided that he would come back to church on Easter. So a very timely story. So the woman said she was so excited. Imagine he'd been away from the church for 5, 6 years. He's coming back for Easter, the Easter Vigil or whatever. And he sat next to her and he held her hand. He was so happy. It's because he was gay. I should have started the story with that. Her son is gay and felt sort of marginalized in the church. So the Easter reading that time was the risen Christ appearing to Mary Magdalene. Do you know what the priest preached on? Same-sex marriage on Easter, and how disgusting it was and terrible. And the mother said the kid let go of her hand and walked out of church.
Yeah.
And I remember I told Pope Francis this story, and he said, on Easter? I said, yeah, same-sex marriage. So that's the kind of stuff that LGBTQ people have to put up with all the time. I'm sorry, that a sermon against same-sex marriage does not belong on Easter.
No.
And you have to ask yourself, what message am I sending? Nor does a sermon against birth control, belong
Right.
at Easter. So, yeah, so that's what they have to put up with. And I think by being friends with people, what am I trying to say? We need to be friends with people who have been treated like that by the church if we want them to feel at all welcome. Because a lot of times, one more thing, a lot of times they just say goodbye.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not gonna, I don't need to be treated like this.
Yeah. No, and it's something I've thought about a lot, is that the church really is a place for all people. We're all called to be a part of this church. And I think about their loss at a personal level and their hurt, but also I think about all the gifts that we're losing.
Oh,
I
church
mean,
is lost.
yes, the
No,
church loss.
I mean, and this is not to stereotype, but I'm sure we all know that so many of them work in creative fields like music ministry in particular, and how many music ministers in parishes and guidance counselors and teachers and in school, particularly in high schools, and then they get fired. We don't fire people in other, we don't fire Protestants because they don't believe in the Immaculate Conception, and
Right.
we don't fire Protestants, we don't fire agnostics and atheists, we don't fire Jewish, but we fire LGBT people if they're in same-sex marriage. So we're losing a lot of their gifts. You're right.
Yeah.
And it's sad, I think, because oftentimes when these people are fired, I was writing about this a while ago, and I kept coming upon the same trope, which is they were the most beloved teacher. Now, John, you've written for America, and well, that can't be right. They can't all be the most beloved. But, I realized one of the reasons they're described like that is because these people who are LGBT, who work for the church, really have to want to be there. And they're usually extremely committed, devoted, passionate.
Mhm.
And those are the ones we end up firing. And it's a scandal to the community and especially to kids.
Yeah.
So it's tragic.
Yeah, it really is. I'd like to, I'm not sure that we have questions now, but I'd like people to start to think about questions if they have any. Start to add their questions to the chat. Fang Fang and Kevin, the team joining me here from Center for Christian Engagement, will be happy to keep their eyes on those questions as they come in. And you might have something on your mind that I haven't mentioned, that Father Jim hasn't talked about yet. So please feel free to put those questions. I will try to answer as many as we can. Yeah, think about people just not feeling welcome in the church, and I think that for me, this might seem overly dramatic. I don't think it is, but I think it's heartbreaking
Oh, totally. That's
that
not
people
that,
just, yeah.
it's not overly dramatic. And some of the stories I hear are just unbelievable. I had a woman come into me a couple years ago into my office. I forget who she was, which is probably good. And she said to me that when she came out to her campus, college campus minister, he's priest, he said, "No, I'm sorry to hear that. I've prayed my whole life never to have to minister to a gay person."
Oh.
And you just think, what a terrible thing to hear, or it's worse overseas.
Mhm.
Sub-Saharan Africa and Eastern Europe, the stuff that church leaders say is unbelievable. Some of the Polish bishops said that gay people are a plague. And imagine being a young Polish Catholic.
Yeah,
You don't feel welcome. I mean, welcome is the last thing you would feel. So this is not the church I think that Jesus wants.
yeah,
I think, Jesus is always going out to people on the margins. I think he'd be going out to the people who were on the margins in society and on the church too.
yeah. Now, do people ever say to you, yeah, but Jesus went out to people on the margins, but he always said you need to repent.
Yeah, all
And
the time they say that. And I always say, we all need to repent. I mean, I say to people, are you using birth control? Are you giving to the poor? Are you forgiving people? Are you mean? Are you helping the environment? Laudato Si is an encyclical, it's a pretty high level of teaching. Well, that's not as important.
Mhm.
And sometimes they go back to the Bible, and there's a field that a little bit about.
Yeah,
And I usually say, they'll say, well, this is an abomination in Leviticus. And one of the things I like to say to them is, well, it also says that people who take the name of the Lord in vain should be stoned, and women who commit adultery should be stoned. Do you agree with that? And they'll say, well, no, of course not. Well, why not? That's in the Bible. Oh, well, that's different. So, as you know, we tend to interpret things, the way we want to, the argument to come out. So it's very selective, And also, I have to say, and better than I do, in a lot of the gospel stories, the Roman centurion, the woman at the well, he doesn't say repent. He
no.
just listens to them.
Mhm.
But people are obsessed with this, obsessed with the, love the sinner, hate the sin. That only applies to LGBTQ people. And usually the people that are saying that don't seem to love the anybody. I mean, it's just so draconian.
Yeah, it is a real difficulty because when I think about, and I mean that in response, because when I think about the twin messages of Jesus that I take away, I'm a very simple person. Love God, love your neighbor.
Yes.
Love God, love your neighbor. In what way am I manifesting that on a daily basis? And I think to myself, not always, not even to the people I love the most.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
constant process of how do I continue to do that? And I wonder if we take our eyes in that sense off the prize as well. How do we love our neighbors and keep focusing on that?
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you a story that I told. I participated in the synod for the last 2 years, and I'll tell you a story that I told, it's totally true. It sounds like it's made up. It sounds like it's almost a parable because it's so perfect. But uh, I knew a guy named Carlos, and Carlos was had been a financier in at Lehman Brothers before Lehman Brothers crashed. So very
Yeah.
successful, very wealthy. He left Lehman Brothers to be a hospital chaplain at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. Okay, so already this guy's a great guy. He was also at our parish, believe it or not, lector, Eucharistic minister, and spiritual director. So, I mean, you can't get much more involved than that.
No,
He
no.
was also gay, and he lived with his partner for 40 years. Carlos got cancer, a special kind of cancer, specific kind of cancer, and his partner Jim nursed him through doctor visits, radiation, chemotherapy, surgery, all the way till his death, and just poured himself out. And I did his funeral mass, and the parish was packed.
Mhm.
And the question I think the church and we all have to ask ourselves is that love?
Mhm.
It's a really important question. Is that love or not? Now, I would say yes. It's self-sacrificing. It's faithful. So I think it's something the church really needs to ask itself. I think we all need to ask ourselves. And if it is love, then what are we doing about that? And how do we look at it? And how do we think about it?
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's a really important question. Is that love? And why can't the church kind of see that?
Yeah. So we do have some questions that have come in now. Um, so um, Kevin, were you going to read those questions? Is
Yes.
that right? Thank you.
Yes, I can. There was one question from an audience member. So she remarks that in her diocese, the words courage and encourage are usually the go-to approaches for accompanying LGBTQ people and their families. But her question is, in a parish setting, especially in her family's group, how do we create space for more open and compassionate conversations that may meet people where they're at?
Well, that's a great question. I think, did you say within families?
Yeah, they have, groups with families,
I
children,
see, yeah.
the whole.
That's a very good question. I think a lot of it depends on the parish and where you are, the city, the culture, the diocese, the makeup of the parish. Some parishes are more open than others, some groups are more open than others. Okay, that's kind of a vague answer. So I think, the most basic thing would be sharing sessions. What's your experience? Listen to the person's experience. Now, there might be a lot of pain there. It might be difficult. What do you want from the church? What do you need from the church? What's your experience of the church? But also, I find in these situations, it's really helpful to listen not to LGBTQ people as LGBTQ people simply, but as believers. So not just tell me about life as an LGBTQ person. It's tell me about your experience of God. Who is Jesus for you? What's your favorite gospel verse? So I think that can help sort of break down barriers. I think trying to do it without judgment is really helpful, without correcting. And I think it can be hard at times because you'll hear a lot of pain. You'll hear a lot of these stories of what some priest or some sister or some lay leader said to me, which can be really wounding. But I think as long as people know that they have a safe space, that they're welcome, that they're loved, and I think we all, I mean, as John was saying, love God and love your neighbor, I think we all know how to do that. I mean, I hope we do. Listening, being friendly, being positive, celebrating them, lifting them up, thanking them. I sometimes think LGBTQ people, I think of the centurion, never in Israel have I seen faith like this. These people, they put up with a lot and they still come to Mass and they still are faithful Catholics. So I think it's kind of respecting that. But I would just say, listen and share. It's a good way to start.
Oh, John, you're muted right
Oh,
now.
I think you're muted, John.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Kevin, there was another question that came in on the chat, I think a few minutes ago, that also had to do with ministry. Do you want me just to go ahead and read that one?
Sure. Yeah.
What do we say when someone comes out to us in a ministry context?
Well, gosh, first of all, I would say thank you for sharing that with me. And what a grace that it is that you're able to understand that part of yourself and understand how God made you. That's the first thing. That God loves you and you're welcome here, as a gay person. How can I help you? I think coming out for a lot of people, it's a time of, it's very emotional for a lot of people. Now it's not the way it was 30 or 40 years ago, even 20 years ago. but it still can be difficult for people, young people, or people who have been, not open about their sexuality and are older. I think it's a time of freedom. I did this book on Lazarus. It's not about LGBT people. But, coming out of the tomb is the same kind of move. It's leaving something that is dead behind, which is the sense of yourself as flawed or mistaken or damaged goods, and into the light, right? Into the new light. So I think it's a time of rejoicing. It's a really special time. And let me tell you, if someone comes out to you in a pastoral setting, they're taking a big risk. That means they really trust you. I'd also say this, people ask me this a lot of times. There's not much wrong you can say. I mean, if you love the person, you're a good person, you're trying to support them, just kind of trust yourself. I would also say this, I say this to any minister, trust that God has put you there. And so if you're a mother with 3 kids and you're working in the parish as a pastoral associate, or you're a newly ordained priest, trust that God has put you there and that person wants to hear from you. So to just kind of, in other words, it's not like a script. Kind of trust yourself. But if someone comes out to you, that's a great sign of trust and what's the word I'm looking for? It's an honor for you. Most of the people I deal with are already out, so I don't hear that too much. Now, what I do hear, though, is parents. Parents will say, my child is gay, and, thank you, Father. There was a big change in the last 15, 20 years. 15, 20 years ago, I would hear people whisper. They come up to me at book talk, Father, my daughter is gay. And now they'll say, Father, my daughter is gay. That's a big change.
Mm-hmm. Here's a really interesting question. I'm not sure which one you had in your mind, Kevin, because there's a few of them now, but I was just looking at this one. When we refer to anyone as being on the margins, this guest asks, particularly in relation to their sexual orientation and gender identity, doesn't that put them on the margins simply to Why do we need to define people that way?
No, I get that question. Well, that's a fair question. And a lot of LGBT people say to me, I'm not on the margins. Don't put me on the margins. But it is true that many of them feel marginalized in their church. I think that's accurate. Many LGBTQ people feel that they are being marginalized, that they are being pushed to the side, that they're being targeted. So it's a complicated term. But I think it does still, in general, describe the way that many LGBTQ people feel. But no, I also like what Cardinal Wilton Gregory, formerly the Archbishop of Washington, said to a transgender woman who came to one of these Theology on Tap programs. I'm sure a lot of you know what that is, right?
Yeah.
Kind of a young person lecture or seminar, usually at a bar or something. And she said, I am transgender. Where do I belong in the church? And he said, this is really great. You are at the heart of the church. So right at the center. But anyway, I use that term because that's how many of them feel as Catholics, pushed to the sides.
Yeah. There's a number of questions here. Kevin, feel free if you have some to ask as well. Another one for a ministry context. There's some other great questions. Are there any particular programs you know of that are especially helpful or successful in LGBT support groups in parishes?
Yeah, if you go on our outreach.faith website and you go under parishes, I think there's even an article called How to Start a Parish Group. It's funny, there aren't really programs that are officially sanctioned because it's still such a controversial ministry. So you would think that the U.S. Bishops' Conference or the Canadian Bishops' Conference would have a how to start an LGBTQ outreach, but it's still so fraught. You have to kind of cobble it together. But if you go online, go to our website. It might take you a while to find it, but under parish, there's an article called How to Start a Parish Group. Here's the thing I often say to people. It's also not one size fits all. What works in, New York might not work in Toronto, right? Or in British Columbia, right? It may not work. It's just a different world. So part of it is asking, sometimes it's asking the LGBTQ people, what would you like? Is it a sharing group? Is it a group for your families? That's a very popular way of starting. Are they retreats? Right? Is it an actual LGBTQ outreach group in the parish? Can you call it LGBTQ? Some of them have these more sort of inclusive names like image, God's image, or affirmation or something. Maybe that would raise less eyebrows or fewer eyebrows.
Mhm.
So I think part of it is discerning what works where you are. But like I said, go online. You can find that article, and I think you'll appreciate it.
Thank
Right.
you.
I also want to say, I'm sorry to forget. I also want to say there's a book, forgive me, by Frank DiBernardo, who works at New Ways Ministry. The title I forget, and it is about starting a group in your parish.
Oh, there was another question earlier. I guess going back to the idea of people feeling marginalized. This audience member asked a question. Do gay and lesbian singles or couples commit a sin when they are in sexual relations? I will extend that question a bit to knowing like how do gay and lesbian couples or people feel welcome in the church or dwell in the church, knowing that they can never be in a union that's legal in the church, and but they're expressing love in the way that they feel genuinely, they know how, and then but they feel
Yeah,
like
I think this.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that you can ask the same question about, again, people who use birth control. How do they feel welcome in the church? Right. So, I mean, part of it is the church defines all those things as sinful and outside of church teach, outside of the boundaries of, morality. People in their consciences, understanding the gospels, understanding church teaching, right? Um, they make decisions. And I guess this relentless emphasis on LGBTQ people as the only people who are sinning, we really have to get away from this because we don't do that to straight couples. We just don't. I mean, I hate to get indelicate, but every man almost who comes to me for a confession talks about masturbation, right? I don't want to get too indelicate, but do we hear people thundering about that from the pulpits? No, right? And so it's a very selective thing that we're doing by focusing only on LGBTQ people and only on their sexuality, right? And only on the things that they're doing. So I think we need to see it in the context of their whole lives, right? And again, that question about my friends Carlos and Jim, is that love or is that not love? It's an important question in the church.
So, Kevin, I might ask this next question. How do we build bridges with those whose Catholic identity and belief seems fundamentally aligned with the exclusion or even hate of LGBT people? How do we approach that attitude? And what small everyday responses and advocacy on behalf of LGBT people can make inroads there?
Well, I love that small everyday responses. I think that's the answer right there. Usually arguments don't really help. They just don't. Walter Brueggemann, the great scripture scholar, said that arguments tend to close our minds down, and this is what Jesus taught in stories. When Jesus is asked, as John knows, who is my neighbor? He doesn't say, here's 10 points. Here's a PowerPoint presentation about who a neighbor is. Yeah, I know, right? He tells a story. A man went down to Jericho, right? He tells the story of the Good Samaritan. I think stories really open us up and encounters with people. So what do you do with someone or how do you interact with someone who's really negative? I think first of all is taking them where they are, right? And listening to their objections, their reasonable objections, and they don't, this is what the Bible says, and this is what I understand church teaching. Listen to them, of course, right? And treat them with dignity. Try to answer them the best you can, but also talk about your experience. Let me tell you about my daughter. Let me tell you about my son and his partner. Let me tell you what they're doing. But I think nothing really changes and converts hearts like coming to know these people. One of the things that I've been surprised about is that as more and more people come out, More and more bishops and priests have nieces and nephews who are gay, and that's changing them. It just is. Not all of them. And why is it? Because they know them and they see them as loving, caring, generous people. No, I mean, not every LGBTQ person is like that, but not every straight person is like that either. So I think those small everyday ways are also telling stories of pain too. But really nothing substitutes for encounter, to use one of Pope Francis's words. I mean, look, Pope Francis before he got ill, met regularly every month with transgender people. Just meeting them, listening to them, hearing their stories, right? So if he can do it, we can do it.
We also have a question. I know we have a lot of questions still and not too much time, but I'm hoping we can get through a few more of them because we're getting just great questions here. In Vancouver, I was told as a new pastor that we should not be supporting courage. Oops, I've just lost the question here. As a new one came in, I was told as a new pastor that we should not be supporting courage. I have a hard time supporting this path. I'm not aware of dignity. Are you aware of any alternatives like dignity in Canada? It might have even been Western Canada.
Yeah, there are so many different groups. And you can look at the stuff we do at Outreach as resource. I think in general, it makes sense personally. I think it makes sense for parishes to have their own LGBTQ outreach groups because they can be better tailored, right, to the needs of the parish. That's nothing against courage or dignity or new ways, but those tend to work really well. I live right next door, literally. The wall is outside my window, literally. I live next door to a church called Church of St. Paul the Apostle, run by the Paulists. And they have a group called Out at St. Paul's. And it's huge and it's flourishing and it's not really affiliated with anything. Do you know what I mean? It's not a branch of dignity or courage or new ways. It's their own ministry. And I think because they can be flexible that way, it works best. So I think I think local parish groups do better. They're a little more flexible.
Yeah. Another question. Often people see building bridges and welcoming LGBT people or divorced Catholics or that's just sort of in quotation marks, or others, as a first slippery slope towards full acceptance into the sacraments. How do we not worry about future possible actions and focus on the now and being welcoming?
I think by remembering that, Jesus was accused of the same things. I think it's a slippery slope to making people feel welcome in their own church, right? And I don't think anyone is saying that, that the same-sex marriage is going to be sacramental, right? I don't think that is going to happen. But we're not even there yet. I mean, we're so far away from that. We're at step one. Step one is just letting these people feel that God doesn't hate them. I mean, so I think the slippery slope is that we end up making people feel welcome and letting them know of God's love. Again, that's the relentlessness of imagine if you're a straight couple that uses birth control. Let's just take that as an example. And you go to Mass and all you see in the back are pamphlets about how people who use contraception are going to hell. And the parish bulletin is about that. And the priest preaches about that. And when election time comes out, they preach about that. You would start to say, like, what is going on here? And why are they so focused on me? And that's how LGBTQ people feel. They do. And that is the experience of a lot of parishes. It is this kind of relentlessness. And then the transgender issue, which we haven't even talked about, which is very complex. I mean, those poor people, my gosh, they're like 0.01% of the population. And you would think it's the greatest threat to the Catholic Church in North America. So we have to really understand how these things are received, right? And how you would feel if you were the parent of an LGBTQ person. And, one woman said to me, I felt like I had to choose between my church and my child. I cannot imagine that this is what Jesus wants. I'm not speaking for Jesus, but it just seems really antithetical to his ministry of mercy and welcome to everyone. And by the way, again, we are all sinful. It's easier sometimes to look at the other person's sin. And Jesus had stuff to say about that too.
Yeah. I have two more questions to read, and
Sure.
I'm going to read them together. They're slightly different, but I think related as well. I
Okay.
consider myself an ally with a politically charged environment currently. Any thoughts on how to navigate this without conflict? That's one question. The second one, Jim, what do you find strengthening, encouraging in continuing to speak up for LGBTQ Catholics in the face of protests, even censoring from some vocal people and even leadership in the church?
Yeah, I like that last question as a question to end on, very positive. The first question, um, how to do it without conflict. I think always speaking from your experience. I think arguments just they really do. You end up in a proof texting and quoting and trying to get at something that the person said wrong, one little slip up. And I sometimes think on these contentious issues, it doesn't go anywhere. I think just speaking from your experience. Look, I'm the mother of a gay kid. Let me just tell you what he's like.
Mhm.
And he didn't do it. He didn't choose this. Or I'm the mother of a girl who just came out as lesbian and she feels like the church hates her. Well, why does she feel that? Well, she does, you know? So I think speaking from your experience can help calm things down. What keeps me going? Well, a couple things. I think the people that I meet who are so faithful, the LGBTQ people I meet who are faithful and active and alive with their faith and have found a place in the church. I think that the support of the Jesuits keeps me going, really. The fact that our Superior General knows about all I'm doing. And, that I have the support of the Pope. He's mentioned that many times to me in person and in letters. But I'll tell you, very first time I met the Holy Father in 2019, look, I'm not a university president or cardinal or archbishop or bishop or anything. I'm just this Jesuit who works in American media. I don't hold an office in the church. So I was surprised to meet with him. And we talked about LGBT ministry and very warm, very welcoming. And towards the end, this is kind of a funny story. I realized, oh my gosh, we've been talking about this the whole time. And maybe he wants to talk about something else. Maybe he wants to talk about whatever, the church in North America or I don't know, the Jesuits or whatever. He's the Pope. So I said, Holy Father, is there anything I could do for you? Meaning, is there anything else you want to talk about? He said, yes, you can continue this ministry in peace. So that really gave me a lot of consolation. It was a kind of mission, but it's the in peace that I found the most helpful. Try to do it in peace.
Yeah.
And so even if protests come up, Jesus promised us that, right? So it shouldn't be surprising, but it's those words with peace that give me great consolation.
That's wonderful. Well, I mean, are there any last words you want to say apart from that? Because those are pretty good ones. And
Yeah, thanks. Well, I would just like to say thanks to everybody. Look, I know it's a difficult topic. I know it can be controversial. I know that. I mean, I know it can be frustrating. You feel like the church moves two steps ahead, one step backward. Just keep doing it and do your best. I always say to people, even if you help one person feel welcome in the church, or, something like someone told me that the risk of suicide for LGBTQ people goes down by something like 40% if they have one welcoming adult in their lives. That's it, just one welcoming adult. So you can save lives. We haven't talked a lot about that tonight, but it's a life or death issue for a lot of people. So just, look, I'll quote our friend John Martin's, love God and love your neighbor, right? Who I think he's quoting a pretty good source. So that's a good place to start. Keep me in your prayers. The book is called Building a Bridge, which I think you'll appreciate. The website is called outreach.faith. And I hope it's helpful for all of you.
I think it genuinely is. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate taking your time out to be with us. I know it's later there. I know probably not too late for you. We're not that old yet.
In my room, I can just get changed after this. So,
So thank you so much for being here. We send you our love, and we're thankful for you being here with us. And we're getting some messages coming in as we say goodbye, and that is thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much. God bless you all. Okay, nice to see you, John. Take care.
See you. Take
Thanks,
care.
Kevin.
Thanks,
Bye.
Kevin. Thanks, Fang Fang. Thank you all for joining us and for being with us. We really appreciate it. And I hope we got to all of your questions. I think we did. So have a good night. And we are taping this. So for your friends who weren't able to make it tonight, and some of them reached out to me, we will be able to have this on our St. Mark's YouTube channel coming up and on our CCE website. So thanks so much.
Night all. Thank you.
Good night.